Good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us today as we present how to utilize feed efficiency to maximize profit, our final webinar in our two-part feed efficiency series. Presenters Ted Cunningham and Jeff Clark will take a closer look today into how feed efficiency and intake testing is used to calculate various EPDs and dollar indexes, along with a look into practical management applications. As a reminder, we'll be opening up the conversation after the presentation today for questions. Go ahead and chat them in throughout the presentation. We will try to answer as many as possible with time permitting. Now I would like to introduce our presenters today. Presenting first, we will have Ted Cunningham. Ted has extensive experience in beef nutrition, commercial beef production systems, and seed stock management and marketing. Not only is Ted from our sales development team, he also owns Cunningham Livestock in Missouri, which specializes in custom cattle feeding and management, as well as bull and heifer replacement development. Ted enjoys hunting and helping his children fit and show their cattle at the local fair. Secondly, we will have Jeff Clark, who is also from our sales development team. Jeff has an extensive livestock management background ranging from feedlots to purebred and commercial operations. In the past, he has utilized feed efficiency data on a large-scale operation in California just before joining us here at CLOC. Because of his experience, he'll be able to help guide producers and researchers as they look towards implementing our technology. Jeff enjoys fishing with his family, and since his relocation here to South Dakota, has now started a new hobby of shoveling lots of snow. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Ted Cunningham.
Hey, greetings everyone, and welcome here today. Especially want to welcome you here on behalf of CLOC Incorporated. Again, as Carla mentioned, my name is Ted Cunningham. I'm coming to you this afternoon here from Central Missouri. Again, really appreciate everybody joining us and your continued interest really in feed efficiency here today. Today's webinar is going to cover a lot of information. It's really designed, however, to address how we can utilize feed efficiency to improve profits, improve sustainability of our beef businesses out here. So I will mention that we have, an opportunity for some questions and answers, as Carla mentioned here at the conclusion of the webinar. Don't hesitate to put those into our chat. And also, hopefully you'll catch here at the end of our presentation, contact information for Jeff and I. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions or any opportunity we might have to have some conversation with you about what we do here at CLOC and how we might be able to work together in the future. So kind of make sure here my slides are advancing correctly. Would like to also mention, if you're joining us for the first time today, and maybe you've missed the previous webinar we had back in March, you can check out all of those webinars on our CLOC.com website, and we have a direct link to all of the webinars we've held in the last 12 months and have quite a list of them there. So please feel free to visit our website. We have lots of valuable information on that site, whether you're a producer, you're a researcher, just interested in technology perhaps, and learning more about what we do and all the things that we're involved with. Check out that website. Also, just to mention, we do have a YouTube channel, and this is kind of the site where we've devoted some videos and information about all of our systems, along with our webinars. So certainly encourage you to follow us on that YouTube channel, as well as any of the social media outlets that we're part of across that spectrum. Today's topics, and just kind of a quick overview of some of the things that Jeff and I are going to kind of cover. I know Carla mentioned some of them, but I'll just kind of walk you through the list here of what we're going to do. We're going to start off, I'll visit with you a little bit about some of the profit drivers in the beef business, and we'll kind of from there just really discuss a couple of the common efficiency measurements that we'll use. I know Jeff will also touch on some of those as well, and touched on those in our previous. We're going to dive a little bit deeper today and kind of have some more discussion around those, as well as general selection decisions. I'll talk some about some of the antagonisms that we might need to think about that could be possible but also the heritability and how we can make some real progress in evaluating these traits and incorporating them into our selection programs. So that really is topic number one. Topics 2 and 3, Jeff Clark's going to cover and really have a more lengthy discussion today that's going to cover EPDs and indexes, how feed intake data can influence some of these EPDs and indexes, and then Jeff's going to share some thoughts, ideas about how commercial beef systems can really utilize this data in their selection decisions and their use of feed efficient genetics to advance their programs and ultimately use them to improve their margin and make more money. And then I'll finally kind of wrap up with item number 4 there, some thoughts and discussion around adding feed efficiency testing to really the seed stock sector and some opportunities to maybe improve marketing, as well as thinking longer term in terms of genetic selection and improvement. Some of the key profit drivers of the beef business. So the first one should really come as no surprise, but at the same time, I think fertility is something that sometimes gets overlooked. But one of the real challenges as we think about this first profit driver in fertility is that we know it's a lowly heritable trait. It means it's going to be challenging to make any huge advances in terms of genetic selection. And when we think about it being lowly heritable, what that really means is that this trait is heavily influenced by the animal's environment. And so when we talk about the animal's environment, one of the things we have to think about, things like temperature and climate, those are certainly part of that environment. Things such as forage type. I'm here in central Missouri, south central Missouri, and fescue is our dominant forage. And there's some really unique things about that and advantages and disadvantages, so to speak. But those are all things that feed into that animal's environment. But when we distill everything down, really, probably the most significant source of variation as we think about fertility and the effect that environment has it's going to come down to really the available feed resources. How much feed is available to those animals? And so I think, this is probably a really great opportunity to just kind of point out that there has been really good data that shows a positive relationship between feed efficient animals and fertility, which, that should make some sense in all reality here. We have animals that are more efficient, have a lower feed requirement. Effectively, that means, in a cow herd setting, in a grazing setting, those animals should be more metabolically efficient and should, on average, have lower maintenance energy requirements, which should basically mean that they should have more efficient use of what energy they bring into their system and partition that energy for some of those functions, which would include reproduction. Kind of the second driver that we can talk about is one we're all familiar with, and those are performance traits. And without a doubt, I think these are all top of mind for most cattlemen, and no doubt they're also very economically relevant. So we can talk about things like weaning weights, yearling weights, carcass weights, ribeye, whatever trait there. I think most folks are pretty familiar with them, and just suffice to say, our industry has made some really great strides in these traits, especially since the advent of EPDs, since the advent of genomics and the ability to use DNA. And especially, as we look at feed yard data, things like live and hot carcass weights have really increased in the past couple of decades. Let's take a look, though, and think about something like weaning weight. If we dive in and really start looking at weaning weight data, there's been some improvement, but probably not as much improvement as you might expect with really the increased genetic selection pressure that's been placed on it. And so what's kind of going on there? And the answer is really fairly straightforward. And it's just because, as we think about putting that added selection pressure on something such as weaning weight, there's also other factors at play, and the environment is certainly one of those factors. And so, as we increase the genetic potential for animals to potentially wean heavier, there is also a correlated increase from that animal's environment that has to support those growth genetics. And so without a doubt, our performance traits, yes, they're moderate to highly heritable, but at the same time, there kind of has to also be an amplified environment and potential feed resources to help exploit those improvements in performance traits that we might see. The third driver I'll just kind of discuss here is really related to input costs. And at this point, I feel like a kind of a broken record. Just I've said it so many times over the career in working in the beef business. But feed does account for a vast majority of the input costs of any beef system. And when I say the input costs related to feed, just to be clear, that means both harvested feedstuffs as well as those grazed forages out there. So, the cost of land, the cost of fertilizer, cost of labor are all major inputs, and in many cases represent the difference between an operation remaining profitable and another one going into the red. So, what I'd like to do just for a moment, just to kind of engage our audience here today is, as we've thought about and discussed these three main profit drivers, I'd just kind of like you, to answer this question. And so this really poses an opportunity. Just imagine you've got a magic wand. Maybe you can magically just kind of snap your fingers and improve two of these three profit drivers by 10%. Which two would you choose? And so I'll let Carla kind of run that poll here for a moment, and then we'll come back and share the results. I will go ahead and just preface this by saying there is no right answer to this. Just like to get a feel for your thoughts and ideas about these three profit drivers. Mike, and yeah, and that's to some extent that's kind of what I anticipated. Depending upon maybe the sector you're involved with, depending upon the scenario that you're currently in, I anticipated there to be kind of a wide range of answers from that poll question. But to some extent, I think the message that Jeff and I want to bring to you today is really, let's think about ways that we can do all three at the same time. And so, this poll was kind of maybe designed to help you prioritize or get a feel for some priorities for you. But certainly there is the complete opportunity out here to make improvements across all three of these. And we do want to emphasize as much as anything as well today is that, feed efficiency, much like any other trait, it really should be used in conjunction with these other economically relevant traits in your operation. So, very much so, we would stress that selection decisions related to feed efficiency do need to be part of a balanced selection plan. Kind of the other message I think we want to make sure we convey today is that feed efficiency is really, we feel like it's really important because it is one of the few opportunities we have on a daily basis to reduce costs. So every day those animals are standing out there and we're delivering feed to them, or they're standing there grazing, we have the ability to reduce how much those animals require. And long term, it should help us improve some margins across the spectrum of the beef industry. So, and again, that kind of goes from all the way from the commercial cow-calf to the feed yard setting, and certainly it all starts with making good genetic selection decisions at the seed stock level. So kind of simplify things here just a little bit, but feed efficiency is one of the big drivers in input costs. It's a fairly intuitive slide here, I think, but as we think about improving feed efficiency, we certainly understand that it holds lots of potential to reduce feed costs. We should also be able to have these fertile cows ultimately that require less feed, and that could certainly lead to us improving or increasing stocking rates. And then finally, from maybe a longer run perspective, if we're able to run more cows on a constant resource base, we should see on a per animal basis lower capital and labor costs. All right, so let's kind of dive into some discussion around two of the most common feed efficiency measurements and have some discussion around them as selection tools. And know Jeff covered feed conversion ratio on our last webinar, but just going to touch on that for a minute here. So, feed conversion ratio is really just expressed as some unit of feed per unit of gain. It's a very simple calculation, and it's basically just that weighted ratio of intake and gain. Feed conversion ratio has historically been used kind of as that benchmark as we think about feed yard cattle that close out of a feed yard, and we look back to see how much feed was delivered to a pen of cattle and do those group closeouts and can kind of benchmark where we're at on a pen basis or on a group basis. As we stop and think about this calculation, it becomes pretty apparent that, if we're wanting to just simply improve feed conversion ratio, we've got kind of two options. We can start addressing growth, which is part of that, or we can start thinking about addressing the intake side, or more than, perhaps even better, would be some way of addressing both of those at the same time. So, let's follow up on that thought process with just another quick question related to our industry. And so, I kind of pose this question. Has the beef industry increased growth among their cattle in the past several decades? And I don't think we need to show much data here, but I think for the most part, most folks are probably nodding their head in agreement that we've seen improvements in genetic ability for these cattle to grow and produce more red meat yield over the last couple of decades. What if we pose the question, have we made any real improvements in feed conversion ratio? And, it should really kind of almost stand to reason that if we've improved growth, there should be a real possibility that feed efficiency or feed conversion ratio has also improved. So, I pulled data from the Kansas State Focus on Feedlots program, which summarizes monthly feed yard closeout data. And this was a meta-analysis that they put together that spanned the years of 1990 through 2011. Just kind of from this chart, it's most definitely, it would appear that at least through that first those 20 years or so, there was some marginal improvement in feed to gain. One of the things I guess I would point out and like for you to think about as well, genetics likely played some role in this improvement. But if we think about some other technologies that maybe came into widespread adoption during that time frame, ionophores, we had better implant technology. All of those things of which are documented to improve beef feed efficiency. I would tend to think that also probably played some role in improving feed efficiency. So kind of the next question, well, what about the next 10 years? This is old data that goes up through 2011. What about the next 10 years? And so, I just didn't do an extensive deal. I looked at what were the January closeouts from 2012 all the way through 2021 here, just as recently as a few months ago. And so this represents, again, we're it's pretty stagnant in terms of improvement in feed efficiency across our business. We had one month there back in, I guess, 2014 or so that, feed conversion dipped below 6, but on average, we're hovering or just staying pretty constant in the low 6-to-1 ratio for these feed yards. So really effectively unchanged in the last decade if we just look at this data set from Kansas City, or the state of Kansas and feed yards there. So really kind of the final question I would pose, is what happens if I start basing a lot of my genetic decisions solely off of, feed conversion ratio? And this is one spot where I think we need to make sure and bring up that caution should probably be exerted. Again, we're not ever advocating that feed efficiency be a single trait selection, but certainly if we start putting lots and lots of pressure on strictly feed conversion ratio, there's a pretty conclusive amount of literature that would indicate that we're going to find those cattle that convert more efficiently just using feed conversion ratio to be larger framed, have genetic potential to have larger cows if we're looking at the heifer side of this. And that's all because feed conversion is heavily dependent on growth rate. So let's talk a little bit about residual feed intake. I know Jeff, again, he covered this in our previous webinar, so we'll just kind of review what RFI is and what it does. And so what it really does is it evaluates each individual animal in their weight and their gain, and it pairs that up and determines if they consumed more or less feed than they should have based on that animal's weight and its performance. So it's important to realize that RFI is independent of an animal's size and growth. But ultimately, there is a strong relationship between RFI and feed conversion. So this is really important, because what this means is we can use RFI to place a bit more selection pressure towards efficiency without any issues arising from inadvertently, selecting for bigger, larger frame cattle. However, again, a lot like feed conversion ratio, the one thing, it's important to make sure we don't single trait select for RFI and strictly look at RFI alone, because RFI is it's independent of growth. If all we use is RFI, it is very possible that we can sacrifice some longer term growth and performance in our cattle. So what RFI really does is it accounts for partitioning of the nutrients to the two main functions that these animals are having, and that's, of course, growth and maintenance. It is very nicely been estimated that over 2/3 of the variation that you might see in RFI measurements are contributed to the metabolic process. And so, there's a deeper scientific side to RFI. And really, this means that by using RFI, we can stand a much greater chance of finding the animals that are truly more metabolically efficient, rather than animals that possess a faster growth rate or simply just have a lower intake rate. Kind of the final slide I have before transitioning over to Jeff really kind of points out that there's opportunities to capitalize on feed efficiency, and maybe more so today than ever. And that's due to a great extent to the fact that feed efficiency is a heritable trait. And so, historically, there's been a fairly wide range of reports around feed efficiency, feed intake heritability that might range as low as 0.2 up to as high as 0.55. But I think it's pretty well commonly accepted that heritability is currently, estimated to be somewhere in the 0.35 to 0.4 range, which makes it a moderately heritable trait. And really, we have the ability to use it and make some genetic progress. The other thing that's making it easier to capitalize on it is quite honestly, we believe feed efficiency testing is as affordable and simple as it's ever been, and the opportunity to identify these efficient cattle and unicorns, as Jeff and I and some colleagues would point out, it's as easy as ever, and we think it's going to increase in the coming years. Really, the utilization of technology to find these cattle. Finally, this is again kind of broken record, but it's without a doubt input costs are rising. Unfortunately, we were part of this webinar about 30 days ago and walked through an example which talked about magnification of the effect of efficiency with different costs of feed inputs. And at that time, we were talking about $5 or $5.50 a bushel corn. Today, everybody kind of knows May corn contracts north of $7 a bushel. Feed efficiency is really maybe the one of the only ways we can soften the blow during these times of higher feed costs, and yet it works irregardless of feed costs. And so we can significantly improve margins during low feed prices and soften the blow at times like we're experiencing now. At this time, guys, I appreciate it. I'll come back to you here to kind of wrap things up in a minute, but I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jeff Clark. Again, Jeff's going to walk us through some of the EPDs and indexes and have a more in-depth discussion about feed efficiency. So welcome, Jeff, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Ted. I just got unmuted here. Can you all see my screen all right?
Looks good, Jeff.
Very good. Well, I appreciate y'all being here. I have a tremendous amount of detailed content to cover today, so I'm not going to waste time, and I'm just going to kind of get started here. So, the first thing I wanted to mention is that monitoring for feed efficiency and utilizing this information in a breeding program is still very much in its infancy in regards to widespread industry adoption. Not all breed associations currently even offer EPDs that reflect this information, but every breed seems to have at least a small subset of early adopters that have been capturing and utilizing this data for years on their own terms. I believe those folks that were able to see the value of this information early on are positioning themselves to be leaders in the space. As this trait continues to gain momentum in the industry, and from my perspective, those that are not paying attention to this area are going to be playing catch up in the not so distant future. That being said, for the purposes of today's webinar, I'll primarily be focusing on the most widely used EPDs that reflect this information, which happen to be facilitated through the American Angus Association. I just want to be clear, though, for our audience, however, that there are many breeds that excel in this trait, and by focusing on this particular set of EPDs and dollar indexes today, we in no way are promoting Black Angus cattle over any other breed. So now that we have that bit of housekeeping out of the way, let's start our conversation here about EPDs. So first and foremost, let's define what an EPD actually is. An EPD, or expected progeny difference, provides an estimate of the genetic potential we may realize in future progeny of a specific animal. Now, differences in EPDs between two animals of the same breed predict differences in performance between their future offspring when assuming each individual animal is mated with animals of equal genetic merit. EPDs are calculated for a wide variety of industry relevant traits and are reported in the same units of measure as the trait. One thing to note when utilizing EPDs as a genetic selection tool is that EPD values may only be directly compared between animals of the same breed. In other words, you can't compare a birth weight EPD from Black Angus cattle with a birth weight EPD from Charolais cattle without first applying the proper adjustment factor to account for the breed differences. Most major beef breed associations analyze and report EPDs. These EPDs are calculated using complex statistical equations and are regularly updated by the respective association. In general, these statistical models use various data points, including the individual animal's performance data, data generated from its ancestors, what we call collateral relatives, such as brothers and sisters, along with direct and indirect progeny, such as grandsons and granddaughters, etc. While each EPD includes its own list of specific data points utilized in its calculation, all of the performance records used in these calculations have already been adjusted for factors such as age, sex, and age of dam prior to being included in the database. To take it a step further and ensure the ability for breeders to really compare these animals, even in different parts of the country, or world for that matter, the statistical analysis used for EPD calculations also attempts to account for environmental effects, such as plane of nutrition and even climate differences that can be seen between herds of the same breed, operating in completely different geographical areas, essentially leveling the playing field and allowing breeders to compare any animals within the database. Most EPDs also include a breed percentile ranking and estimated accuracy. The breed percentile ranking helps us to understand exactly where each animal falls within the breed for a specific trait. This bit of information is extremely valuable and needs to be closely monitored as we try and breed animals that will continue to move our herd in what we feel is the right direction. This will vary from ranch to ranch based upon their management style and feed resources, but for example, out west, I would not want to be breeding cattle that fall in the top 10% of the breed for milk production, given the available feed resources and environment. In contrast, if I was operating in central Missouri, I may not shy away from adding a bit more milking ability. Now, accuracy values are another essential piece that estimate the relationship between what we will actually see on the ground in regards to the phenotypes displayed in real progeny versus the estimated EPD. This number is adjusted as more progeny are added into the database, and as values move closer to 1, we can assume that the EPD is more likely to represent the true genetic merit of the animal and is less likely to change as more records are added to the database. If you look at the EPD set in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide here, you'll see a few EPDs for a highly used sire in the Angus breed. That top number would be the actual EPD. Just below that, you can see the accuracy rating. Below that, you have the percentile ranking within the breed. And finally, at the bottom, you see a number that reflects the actual number of progeny records reported for each trait. Now that we have an in-depth understanding of EPDs in general, we can take a look at some of the EPDs and dollar indexes in which reported feed intake data is directly and indirectly utilized. There are many more EPDs out there than the handful that we will cover today, but for the purposes of this webinar, the traits covered are more relevant to our end goal of utilizing feed efficiency data to truly impact your operation in a positive way. Starting us off here on our list of EPDs directly influenced or derived from actual feed intake data, we have dry matter intake, or DMI. DMI is expressed as the difference in pounds of dry matter consumed on a daily basis and is a predictor of the ability for each animal to transmit this difference in feed intake to its progeny, specifically during the post-weaning phase of production. Excuse me. Another EPD directly influenced by feed intake is residual average daily gain, or RADG, and is expressed as a difference in pounds gained per day of future progeny, again, during the post-weaning phase, given a constant amount of feed consumed. This EPD in particular provides us with an easy-to-use performance-based metric to allow for the comparisons to be made in relation to both intake and gain versus dry matter intake, which is strictly an intake-derived number. So what is a dollar index, and which dollar indexes are directly affected by submitted feed intake data? Now, dollar indexes are an economic selection tool that allows for changes across multiple traits pertaining to a specific breeding objective. Additionally, industry average costs of production relevant to the specific index are updated and included in the calculation. So essentially, the dollar value is an estimate of how future progeny are expected to perform on average compared to another sire's progeny if the sires were randomly mated to cows and if calves were exposed to the same environment. One of the indexes available that account for feed intake as part of the calculation is feedlot value, or $F. Now, $F, along with the other dollar value indexes we will talk about today, is expressed as the difference in dollars per head, with $F specifically looking at these differences when predicting profitability in progeny due to genetics for post-weaning feedlot performance compared to the progeny of other sires. This index assumes producers will retain ownership through the feed yard and sell cattle on a carcass weight basis, but does not include consideration of both premiums and discounts associated with either quality or yield grade. Traits included in this calculation include yearling weight, carcass weight, and dry matter intake. Next up here, we have $B, which needs no introduction, as most of us are familiar with this terminal index, and I will continue to refer to this index as terminal because that is exactly what it is and exactly what it was designed to measure. $B is derived from terminally oriented traits such as yearling weight, marbling, carcass weight, ribeye area, and fat. Additionally, dry matter intake is also included in the calculation. I will say, however, that just because a bull may fare well in the $B index, this doesn't necessarily mean that there's no maternal value that can be derived from that bull. I've seen myself many sires that do very well with $B and also maintain excellent feet, udder quality, and fertility in female progeny. However, on average, the Angus Association has stated in the past that poorer foot quality, or rather increased claw and some reduced heel depth, has been found to be positively correlated with $B. So this is just something that we as breeders need to be aware of as we look at bringing in and implementing any unproven sires into our program. Next up here, we've got $C, which is relatively new and was designed to be used as a sort of all-around dollar value index for producers looking to add the most value to their herd while also taking the maternal side of things into account. It assumes that producers will want to retain 20% of their home-raised females as replacements, with the remainder of the cull heifers and steer progeny being shipped to the feed yard, where producers will retain ownership and sell those cattle on a quality-based carcass merit grid. This is by far the most expansive dollar index in regards to the number of traits that contribute to it. And it includes both calving ease, direct and maternal, weaning weight, yearling weight, maternal, milk, heifer pregnancy, docility, mature cow weight, foot angle and claw set, marbling, carcass weight, ribeye area, fat thickness, and lastly, you guessed it, dry matter intake. So now let's touch real quick on a few indexes with an indirect association with feed intake and why I have these classified as having an indirect association. So each of these indexes is calculated based upon assumed feed intake, or rather energy requirements, derived from looking at both mature cow weight and milk. Actually, dry matter intake records are not even included in these calculations. That being said, as we continue to move forward as an industry and are able to submit more and more actual feed intake records, I personally can see these EPDs being adjusted to include dry matter intake at some point in their calculation. When this happens, I believe that cow-calf producers who retain replacement females will really be able to derive a tremendous amount of value from these numbers in particular. But in saying that, I do not mean that these numbers are not incredibly valuable tools as they sit right now, because they are. We all know that on average, bigger cows consume more feed, and higher milkers typically have higher energy requirements than smaller, lower milking cows. What we are finding, however, as we continue to gather more feed intake data on the female side especially, is that this is not necessarily always the case. And there are large, heavy milking females out there that are eating the same amount as some of these lighter, lower milking cows. And to me, this just drives home the need for us to test more animals and submit that data to the association to be considered in these calculations. So let's take a look at cow energy value, or dollar energy, which is expressed as a dollar savings per cow on an annual basis due to the difference in assumed energy requirements of daughters sired by different bulls. That being said, a larger positive value is more favorable when comparing two animals. However, we need to realize that dollar energy, like every other selection tool, needs to be used in combination with all the other tools available, as dollar energy includes the assumed, keyword assumed here, savings difference from lactation energy requirements and energy costs associated with differences in mature cow size, but does not include any sort of production or performance-based metric in its calculation. So, essentially, if we chose to breed for specifically high dollar energy cattle, we would most likely see a decrease in mature cow size, decrease in milking ability, decrease in weaning and yearling weights, decrease in carcass weights, and we all kind of get the idea here. That being said, however, if you are running cows in rough, dry country like, I don't know, let's say Newcastle, Wyoming, for example, we've got a few producers running out there. They know how dry it is, and where these cows need to be able to survive and breed back on a very restricted plane of nutrition, then dollar energy should probably be weighted a little higher than it would be for a producer in, let's say, East Tennessee. So next up here, we have weaned calf value, or dollar W. This is another index that most cattlemen are well familiar with and is expressed as a difference in dollars per head between progeny of various sires, specifically due to the genetics from birth to weaning, with the underlying objective being that producers will also retain 20% of their heifers as replacements. After that, they then sell the rest along with their steers as feeder calves. The traits considered in this index include birth weight, weaning weight, milk, and mature cow weight. Moving on to maternal weaned calf value, or dollar M, we see an increased focus on some more maternally oriented traits that include calving ease direct, calving ease maternal, weaning weight, milk, heifer pregnancy, docility, mature cow weight, claw set, and foot angle. $M is designed to predict differences in profitability from conception to weaning, with our main breeding objective being to produce quality females in which we will keep 25% of the first generation and 20% of each subsequent generation as replacements, along with selling the rest of that calf crop as with the other traits at weaning. As with all of the EPDs and indexes mentioned in our presentation today, it's very important that we understand all the information used to compile each specific number. The reason I mention this is, as you know, the calculations and weight of each trait included in these different tools are adjusted from time to time, which can sometimes drastically alter a bull's numbers in either a positive or negative direction. I myself noticed that at one point when $M was still in its infancy, the highest $M cow in the Angus breed was actually a heifer with no progeny on the ground and no foot score data turned in. This is where paying attention to the pieces that impact these traits, as well as the accuracy rating, can help us from making some mistakes, as we move forward and apply some of these genetics to our herd that could, cause consequences for years to come. So how does a commercial cattleman utilize these available tools along with feed intake or efficiency data to add some real value to their operation? This has to begin with some standard record keeping, I feel, of what we, kind of think is the most important profit drivers in our operation. This would include more general things such as pounds produced per acre, pounds weaned per cow exposed, stocking rate, cows ran per labor unit, and annual cow maintenance costs, to more detailed items such as tracking our dry cow weights over time, in order to monitor really where our herd's average mature cow weight is throughout the year, monitoring herd fertility by tracking preg check results on an annual basis, and especially analyzing our available genetic pool, or essentially our bull battery as it compares to the rest of the industry. So, as we move on here, I left a lot off of that list, but you get the point. If we don't measure it, we can't monitor it, and we can't improve it. The same thing can be said about feed efficiency. I think we as cattlemen, and I mean both commercial and seed stock producers, really need to understand exactly where we are at in regards to both our herd performance and genetic potential of our current bull battery and semen bank. If we start out not knowing where we're at, we don't know where to go because we really don't know which way is up. And we certainly can't identify the tools needed to help us get to where we actually need to be. Creating a simple Excel spreadsheet containing all available data on your current bull battery, along with an easy to see comparison between your herd average and breed average, is a good place to start. It'll help you quickly identify the areas, at least on paper, where you may want to focus some of your efforts for improvement. But before we start making changes to our herd, we also need to clearly identify, the end goal of our breeding program, along with isolate which industry segment we will be marketing our calf crop into. Are we selling all our calves at weaning, or are we retaining ownership and running them on grass with plans of selling them as yearlings? Are we going to retain ownership of these calves through the feed yard? If so, are we just selling commercial fat cattle or on a carcass-based grid? Are we keeping replacement females, or do we plan to purchase in our own replacements as needed? All of these things need to be answered before we can start to move in any direction. Each has its own opportunities and challenges, but one challenge that is congruent throughout them all is our ability to, kind of easily record and manage all of the different data points that are necessary to properly evaluate and follow your herd performance over time. Investing in an easy to use whole herd data management system is essential, in my opinion. Some of these systems are even free to use, and once you have selected a system that works well for your operation, this investment will not only allow you to better monitor your herd's performance, but it will actually reduce the time you are needing to spend in the office working on the business, which frees you up, obviously, for more time out there working in the business. Another area where, I highly recommend even commercial cattlemen investing a bit of money is implementing an electronic identification system in your herd. When you calculate the cost of EID tags along with the cost of whatever reader you choose to use, there's really no comparison to the increased data capturing ability and reduced labor and time really needed to both record and analyze almost an unlimited number of data points. So, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that every operation needs to collect data on 100 different performance metrics. That's not what I'm saying at all. In contrast, what I am saying is that any areas where you're already collecting data or would like to can be made a lot easier to record and evaluate with the implementation of this technology. So moving forward at this point, we should now know kind of where we're at performance-wise. We've talked about identifying areas for genetic improvement. We have identified our end goal or breeding objective and learned about some of the tools available to help us along the way. As we take the next step towards identifying how we can use both actual feed efficiency data along with EPDs and dollar indexes to push our operation in our targeted direction, a few points of value can be realized no matter what our end goals may be. And I think the most obvious value added to any herd when considering incorporating feed efficiency as a selection criteria specifically is clearly the added ability to truly know that we are making breeding decisions toward producing a more efficient cow herd. And I'm not only referring to folks that are producing replacement females. This applies to terminal operations as well. When we look at the increased feed costs associated with growing calves that require more feed per pound gained, ask anyone who's well versed in utilizing some feed efficient genetics in their herd, and they will tell you, that on short feed years, those cattle sired by feed efficient genetics prove to do more with less and clearly outperform calves sired by less efficient animals. And not only do these calves generally do better, they also at the end of the day leave more residual feed on the ground for other calves and cows to utilize. This value expands dramatically when we start talking about retaining replacement females into our cow herd. And our ability to stack these feed efficient genetics over multiple generations. Many producers who have been early adopters of feed intake testing or purchasing of feed tested bulls have seen their cow maintenance costs reduced from 15 to even 25% within the first handful of years of starting to put more selection pressure towards efficiency. With about 68% or so of cow maintenance costs being directly associated with feed, it's easy to see how this increase in efficiency can really add some tangible value to our operation. By decreasing our feed costs substantially and in turn giving us the opportunity to even increase our stocking rate. So, how are some ways that this is accomplished? I think first and foremost, commercial cow-calf producers need to align themselves with a seed stock producer that produces cattle that perform well and are adapted to their specific environment. I'm not saying that producers should look to only buy locally raised bulls, but I am saying that your seed stock producer's cows should have to work hard or at least a little bit harder than yours and should be held to even more stringent culling practices. The way I think producers, especially those that are keeping replacement females, need to look at this is essentially the cows in your seed stock producer's cow herd are where your cows are going. So it is very important that they have the proven maternal function, fertility, stayability, performance, and efficiency that you're looking for in your herd. If your seed stock producer claims to have quote unquote efficient cattle, yet they are not monitoring feed intake, I would question the validity of that claim as it pertains to feed efficiency. So, And after years, of managing a large-scale commercial Angus operation with a strong focus on feed efficiency, along with purchasing, many feed-tested purebred bulls, I can tell you that just simply DNAing cattle and expecting to have an accurate DMI EPD at this point in the game is extremely challenging at best. Now that being said, as more and more feed efficiency data is submitted to the association, the accuracy of genomic enhanced EPDs, especially those focusing on feed intake, will greatly increase. However, currently we are a long ways away from that being a reality, and at this point in time, collecting actual feed intake data from sires, dams, as well as large contemporary groups of progeny is by far the most accurate way to fully understand the true efficiency of any pedigree. And after you have identified your source for feed efficient genetics that they're proven to be successful in your environment, and they're feed efficient, you need to utilize your current bull battery data to evaluate against new purchases. This is as simple as making sure that you're purchasing bulls that are better in your targeted trait categories, and have feed intake data available that is better than what you had before. This sounds simple enough, right? But if you're starting at square one with no background data available on your past bull purchases, it may be a bit hard to figure out where to start. And this is where I would recommend just trying to stay on the better side of breed average in regards to feed efficiency. So while making sure the performance traits align with your end goal, and at some point, once you have purchased enough genetics with documented feed intake data, you will then be able to have your baseline that you can work off of to more stringently sort potential sires. So, and next, depending upon whether we develop our replacement heifers in a grow yard or out on grass, dictates how we can best go about identifying those females that are not only fertile and sound, but also efficient. By far, the best way to identify these efficient females is to run our replacements through a feed intake test. Whether we facilitate the test on ranch utilizing an affordable system like SmartFeed, or we decide to have a custom grower who has access to feed intake monitoring equipment such as SmartFeed, develop these heifers for us, doesn't really matter. The end goal is simply to accurately and affordably capture this data so that we can not estimate but actually know how these heifers converted. In contrast, if we are developing our heifers on a grass-based system, instead of in a yard, and have been purchasing feed efficient tested bulls from our seed stock provider, we can utilize genomic tests such as Zoetis's GeneMax Advantage or others to not only evaluate the genetic potential of these heifers in multiple areas, but also to sire match each heifer back to the feed efficient genetics that we are hoping to propagate in our herd. How I have personally accomplished this on a large Angus-based commercial cow herd was exactly the way I just described, so along with a few more pieces that I feel kind of made the selection easier and more effective. What I did was pull DNA on all of our heifers when it was time for Bangs vaccinations. And I had already sorted out the bottom end to sell along with our steers. This provided me with the genetic evaluation and paternity test already in my hand by the time we AI'd all of these heifers. Now, what that allowed me to do was to take that data and use it to cull an additional 5% or so of the heifers, that ranked extremely poor on the cow index provided through our genetic testing partner. But before moving forward and wasting, more time, semen, and feed resources on developing these poor performers with the rest of our herd. Cleanup bulls were put in 10 days after the time day eye breeding. This would ensure that all heifers scanned bred at 30 days after their time day eye were actually bred AI prior to the 30-day preg scan. I had gone through, my management software and placed an alert on the heifers that were sired out of our top end efficient bulls, and placed, on the better side of the genomic testing. So what this allowed me to do was this would alert me as I scanned each heifer as it entered the chute, and I was able to then sort these fertile and efficient heifers off one direction and the rest another. Further, what this allowed me to do was essentially to place those, elite genetics directly into the 1/3 of our cow herd that was our maternal base for producing our replacement females, and the rest, which were still very good genetics, into our terminal bunch, which made up the other 2/3 of our cow herd. Now, this system worked well for us in our production environment, but as you all know, each operation is completely different, and there's more than one way to skin a cat. So I would encourage, all of you to really evaluate your own production system, and at the end of the day, look for the most cost-effective way of receiving the highest return on any investment you make towards feed efficiency or any other genetic decisions. My last slide here is basically a summary, more or less, of the areas in which commercial cow-calf producers can really expect to capture the greatest return on an investment towards utilizing feed-efficient genetics in their program. First, and quite possibly the most important area, is your newfound ability to identify inefficient animals in your herd, utilizing some of the tools that we've spoke about in a few of the previous slides to accurately and easily identify and eliminate these poor performers. This can really have a tremendous impact on your overall productivity and efficiency. Now, the picture to the right here, which I feel kind of illustrates the point I'm trying to make in regards to that value, of making the correct culling decision, shows me utilizing two different methods to identify a cow that had a stillborn calf but had successfully adopted a graft calf we had available from another cow that had twins and only accepted one. So when we grafted the calf to this cow, I not only put an extra ear tag in her that simply said, "Sell me," I was also able to apply an alert to her EID tag, so that when I scanned her tag as she entered the chute, my wand immediately vibrated and displayed a message that informed me as to why I had originally decided to sell this cow. This then allowed me to quickly and effectively make an informed decision to sort this cow off with the culls and skip the preg check altogether, because I knew no matter how she pregged, I didn't want to feed her another year just so she could slough another calf. So after you have removed your poor performers, I recommend creating a plan to market your calves in a way that demands a premium. I'm not telling you to avoid shipping your calves to the local stockyard, but I am telling you that whether you are selling those calves locally or on the video, you need to be actively marketing those calves and advertising their genetic potential. That can be as easy as including, in the lot description, the fact that your calves were sired by feed-efficient tested bulls from such and such program. I've personally sold commercial calves in this exact manner and received a $10 to $15 a hundredweight premium over like-kind cattle, simply because I informed the buyer base of the feed-efficient focus of our operation. And to build on this, I think every time you sell your calves, the purchaser pays attention to how your cattle perform. And essentially, every year you bring your offering to market, you're either adding or subtracting to your ranch reputation. In this business, we all know that reputation cattle that consistently perform and create value for the purchaser can see a substantial premium over cattle of like kind with either a poor or maybe even no reputation. Partnering with your seed stock producer and marketing those calves is also a great way to capture some value. Most often breeders that excel in this area either direct market a portion of their beef to consumers or have a network of industry partners interested in purchasing cattle influenced specifically by their genetics, because again, they know that those cattle are going to perform. And as I mentioned earlier, creating a breeding program that utilizes feed efficiency as a selection tool will help you create replacement females that efficiently and effectively excel in your environment. This directly lowers your feed costs and indirectly helps you to lower your labor costs. This is realized by the increase in efficiency seen in your cow herd that will help you reduce your supplemental feed inputs and the labor associated. Along that same line, the increased efficiency of your cows will allow you to increase your stocking rate over time, utilizing the same ground to run more cows and sell more pounds. You know, the last area I have on my list here is probably the most obvious, but if you feed your own cattle or you are purchasing cattle to feed, then you know the impact that feed efficiency has on your cost of gain. For example, if we're feeding out a couple steers that have the same average daily gain, but one steer converts at the industry average of about 6 pounds of dry matter to a pound of gain, and the other converts below average at about 8 pounds of feed to a pound of gain. When we consider this difference applied over a 200-day feeding period, your cost in finishing the less efficient steer is roughly $119 more than the more efficient steer would have cost you. Spread this out over an entire feed yard, and you can quickly see the money being left on the table here by not seeking out and feeding the most efficient genetics available. To add to this, if you're a producer who decides whether or not you're going to retain ownership of your calves and feed them out, you know, on any given year based upon your tax liability, knowing that your cattle will continue to perform and create value for you through the feeding phase can provide a nice hedge against rising feed costs and other factors that can sometimes drain the already tight margins that we see when feeding cattle. So at this time, I'd just like to hand the mic, you know, back over to Ted, who will expand upon the opportunities available for seed stock producers to really incorporate feed intake monitoring into their breeding program and also their marketing effort.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Really insightful and great information, and just kind of wrap things up here pretty quick. I think some real overlap over what you've discussed, and maybe some of the things that I want to touch on, and just have a quick conversation around, you know, for our seed stock producers that might be in the audience and have considered adding feed efficiency testing to their programs. You know, you talk about a lot of really good talking points in terms of the commercial side of the industry and in the application that, quite honestly, most of us as bull producers and seed stock providers need to consider and be able to have real conversations with our customers and buyers about. You know, so the next couple slides really just kind of discuss some of these opportunities and in ways that some questions really to think about in terms of using feed efficiency data and how to advance your program and your marketing efforts to the industries that you're working within and the customer base you're talking about. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I wish I could tell everybody who asked me the question, you know, what's this going to return? If I make this investment, how do I make it pay? And that's a really, really tricky question with, you know, a lot of it depends. And I really wish there was just a quick way I could say, or we had some metric to say that, you know, put smart feed system in, measure intake, and do a good job marketing, and it adds $1,000 per bull to your bull sale. But I can't do that. But I really do truly believe, and our customers believe and would testify, I believe, that this technology is valuable. The data has real value, and it's valuable to your customers, and you're going to reach some new customers by using it. So just kind of, you know, thinking about divvying things up, I guess, into maybe some short-term and longer-term analysis of adding this technology to your system. And so the first thing I would, just a series of questions that I walk through as I work with folks who are interested in this is, you know, what is your current customer base? What are they demanding of your program? What are they potentially willing to pay for some more data on feed efficiency? In having some real thoughts around, you know, what this can do to some of your customers, maybe the amount of additional price per bull, maybe it's marginal for the first year or two, but longer term, you know, 3-4 years down the road, when these guys are using more efficient bulls and you're using that as a sort criteria, what kind of added value can they anticipate, whether they're keeping replacement heifers or they're retaining ownership through the feed yard, and realizing that those cattle are truly more efficient and bringing more value to the table. So the second question really to me is, what new customers could you attract by adding technology to measure feed efficiency to your program? And this is a really big one, because I think we work out here and we're in tune to kind of a buyer base, and certainly have lots of conversations around how much interest there is around feed efficiency right now, and we look for that just to increase as we go forward. And right now, unfortunately, again, feed prices make those conversations a bit more prevalent, perhaps. Kind of along the same lines, does adding feed efficiency to my program, does it set me apart from my competition? And I think that's always something when we think about marketing. That's a big one. And if you can do something that your competition's not, that alone really has some value. But realistically, longer term, we'll talk about that on the next slide, is by doing this and by getting this data early, does it position you to be in a better place in the next 5 to 15 years? Finally, I think, what emphasis have you placed on feed efficiency in the past? So in the short term, if we start testing bulls this fall on your weaned calf crop, what's the likelihood of us finding a unicorn? Again, that bull that converts very efficiently, he's phenotypically very complete, and his EPD profile otherwise is very well balanced and has some attributes that are going to be really well received by the buyer. Those are the kind of bulls that maybe we can hit some home runs on when it comes sale time, and get marketed to another breeder who also has interest in feed efficiency as well, and realistically maybe push this thing a little faster than would otherwise be anticipated. The final one, and I said the final, this is the final one on this slide, but one of the things that gives you a leg up, we work with pretty frequently, is we come across breeders who are interested in measuring feed efficiency, but just don't have the ability to handle a TMR right now. So if you've already got that ability, it kind of gives you a leg up to really quickly just adopt these feed bunks, these smart feed systems, put them into your growing facility, and start measuring feed intake just in a plug and play fashion. So longer term, what are we really thinking about here, and what are those considerations that you need to keep in mind? And I think one of the primary ones here going forward is what traits are going to be economically relevant in the next decade, and how much progress can I really make? And I would truly believe that, again, this is a heritable trait. Some selection and genetic selection pressure on this trait is going to push you down the road pretty quick. And I think it has that ability to kind of position you and be at the forefront as this trait develops and becomes more and more important to our industry. The next couple of questions: who will be your customer in the next 10 to 15 years? That's a hard one, but the one thing I can confidently say is the folks you're selling bulls to today, the majority of them probably are not going to be there in 10 years, just due to the age of our average producer out there, and just kind of turnover in our industry. And we think that the next customer, they're going to be scaled up. They're going to be focused more intently on profit, and probably more intently on how they can utilize their forage base, their feed input side, to generate as much profit as possible. And finally, who's going to be your competition? And again, this maybe goes back to thinking about positioning your program to be as competitive as possible. It also kind of, from an industry perspective, who's our competition now? And it's our competing protein sectors out there who are already more efficient and able to sell a product at a cheaper price point. We want to make sure that the beef industry recognizes that feed efficiency is going to play a role in keeping this protein segment, the beef, at the center of the plate, and an affordable protein choice for the consumer out there. I'll just finally wrap up just a word or two. We think there's a great opportunity out here for some existing grow yards or some folks who are interested in growing cattle, to potentially develop some facilities and incorporate feed efficiency testing into their suite of services. And the reality is, if you've kind of already got that ability and capability to feed and manage cattle, again, you've kind of got a leg up. Our systems are really plug and play. You add these smart feed bunks in, and there's really a genuine opportunity out there to increase and attract a new customer base, generate some additional value, and diversify the income stream for you. So I think that's something we're going to continue to work with and see in the future, these types of opportunities, not only on farm testing, but opportunities for producers who have that capability to grow and manage cattle to add this technology to them. Just kind of finally, again, if you have interest, please visit our website, go to our YouTube channel, and join us on social media at any of the available outlets that you might have. I think we have run completely over time. We're going to take one question here, and I don't know if Carla has a mic yet or Mike has a mic yet, but we'll take one question. We'll kind of close it out. We strongly encourage you. Our contact information, emails, the phone numbers are listed here on this slide. Contact us directly, and we'd be happy to have a conversation and answer any questions that you might have. But greatly appreciate everybody joining you. Mike, do you have any questions out there in the audience that we could address pretty quickly?
Yep. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Jeff. The question is, does a cow feed efficiency rank change throughout the production cycle?
So I'm going to take a stab at this, Ted. I mean, this is a great question, and you would have to track that bit of information throughout the production cycle in order to answer that question. And, specifically, I think you're probably referring to, when that cow is milking versus when she's dry, does she still rank in the same area as she did when she was a heifer developing? And kind of ran across that feed test. And I think there's a good point to be made there that there's a really strong correlation there, and that she typically should. However, I think there's more guys out there recently that have started kind of looking at possibly even running some of their mature cows through a system like Smart Feed to really gauge, where those cows are when they're even raising a calf. Versus the dry season, and kind of calculating, on an individual basis, what are her actual maintenance requirements? So, that's a good question. I'd say we don't have really enough strong data, on that yet to where I could really, reliably tell you one way or another. So that's my personal opinion on that. This be Jeff Clark, by the way, and thank you all for having me. And, I know we had a lot of content to get through today, so it did run a bit long, but we appreciate y'all hanging in there. So
absolutely, thank you to all of you for joining us. Sorry we did run long, but appreciate everybody joining in here today, and stay tuned to our Facebook and social media outlets, as well as our website for announcements on upcoming webinars. And please feel free to contact us if we can help you or work with you in any way. But appreciate it, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks for the CLOC crew back in Rapid City for all their help. But have a great one. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.